What could make a lonely cowboy stare at the half-drowned stranger he had just rescued and whisper, "That can't be my bride"? Rain hammered the cabin roof as Silas turned the mud-soaked envelope over in his hand. Amamira stood barefoot by the fire, watching his face go pale. Her name was still readable beneath the mud, in his handwriting. Then she smiled. "I came all this way for you." But before Silas could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Who had followed her into the mountains? Tell me what you think below. By 4 o'clock, the rain had turned the road through Cedar Hollow into 2 brown ruts filled with standing water. Silas Creed waited beneath the narrow awning of the stage stop with his hat in both hands. He had been there 43 minutes. He knew because he had checked the depot clock often enough to irritate himself. Across the road, a lantern had already been lit inside the mercantile. Horses stood with their tails to the wind. Water dripped from the brim of Silas's coat and gathered around his boots, but he made no move toward shelter. For 11 years, nobody had been expected at Creed Ranch. That morning he had changed the sheets in the spare room twice. The first set had smelled faintly of cedar from the chest. There had been nothing wrong with them. He had changed them anyway. He had swept the floor, carried in extra wood, put a clean blue cup beside the coffee pot, then stood in the kitchen feeling foolish for noticing that he owned only one chair anyone regularly used. All because of a woman named Amamira Dana. He knew her through 9 letters. He knew she read late when she could not sleep. He knew she preferred horses to crowded rooms. He knew she disliked people who mistook silence for agreement. And he knew the sentence in her final letter nearly by heart. "I will come to Cedar Hollow, Mr. Creed. But I am coming to meet you. I am not promising to marry a man simply because I crossed Wyoming to find him." Silas had read that line 6 times. Then he had folded the letter and thought, "Good." The stage horn sounded beyond the bend. He straightened. The coach came through the rain with lamps burning yellow against the gray afternoon. Mud sprayed from the wheels. 4 tired horses pulled hard through the last stretch before the depot. Silas put on his hat. The coach stopped. A salesman climbed down first. Then an elderly couple. Then a man carrying 2 valises. Silas waited. The driver pulled a mail sack from beneath the seat. "That everybody?" Silas asked. The driver looked at him. "Everybody I got." Silas's eyes went back to the empty coach door. "You were due a woman passenger. Amamira Dawn." "Not on my coach." Silas stood without moving. The driver hauled down another sack. Roads south of Blackwater Creek started washing out before noon. Folks coming through there had trouble. Could have been delayed at the last stop. "Could she come tomorrow?" The driver glanced toward the mountains. "Not if this keeps up." Silas looked west. Clouds had swallowed the high ridges completely. He nodded once, turned away, and walked toward his horse. Maybe Amamira had seen Wyoming and changed her mind. Maybe she had reached the last stage stop, looked at those mountains, and decided a lonely cattleman who wrote decent letters was not worth another 40 miles. She had that right. He had told her so. It did not make the ride home feel any shorter. Miles away, Amamira Daine was trying not to look down. The mountain trail had narrowed until the mare's hooves seemed too large for it. Wet stone rose on one side. On the other, pine trees dropped sharply toward a creek she could hear but no longer see through the rain. Her dark wool skirt was soaked below the knees. Water ran from the edge of her brown traveling coat. One glove had split along the thumb where she had tightened the reins too hard. "Easy," she whispered. The mare's ears flicked back. Just a little farther. Amamira did not know if that was true. At the stage stop she had been told the coach would go no farther. A washed culvert had blocked the road, and the next driver would not risk his team. Cedar Hollow was still miles away, so she had spent nearly all the money she could spare on the mare and asked for the mountain road. Now she'd understood why the stableman had looked at the sky before giving directions. Behind her saddle rested one leather bag. Everything that mattered was inside. 3 clean dresses, a hairbrush, $14, and some coins. The papers her father believed she had never seen, and 9 letters tied together with blue thread. Silas Creed. She had never met him, yet she had trusted his handwriting enough to ride into Wyoming. That thought would have frightened her more if turning back had still been possible. Her father's voice returned instead. Edwin Mercer can give you security. Then Edwin's. Your father and I have settled the important matters. As though she were not one of those matters. As though the blank line waiting for her signature were merely an inconvenience. Amamira had left before sunrise. No farewell dinner, no argument at the gate. She had taken the papers proving what had been arranged and what had not been signed, packed what she could carry, and gone. She was not going to Silas Creed because she needed another man to decide her life. She was going because his letters had never once asked her to surrender it. Thunder rolled across the ridge. The mare stopped. Come on. Amamira touched her heel gently to its side. The animal took 3 reluctant steps. Then the mountain made a sound. Not thunder, something lower, closer. The mare jerked her head up. Amamira saw muddy water spilling across the trail ahead. It came around the bend, carrying pine limbs and stones. Back! She pulled the reins. The mare turned too quickly. Its hind hoof slipped. For one suspended instant, Amamira saw the entire valley below her through the rain. Then the trail disappeared beneath brown water. The mare screamed. Amamira struck the ground hard enough to lose her breath. Her hand caught the saddle strap, then lost it. Water spun her sideways. The leather bag tore loose. No! She reached for it. The current took it first. A moment later, it took her. Cold closed over her head. She surfaced once, coughing, saw the mare fighting toward higher ground, then struck something beneath the water. The sky vanished again. She no longer knew which way was up. Her fingers scraped stone, nothing held. Then something seized the back of her coat. An arm came around her waist. Amamira tried to fight it before a man's voice broke through the roar. I've got you. She coughed water. Stop fighting me. She felt boots sliding over rock, a shoulder beneath her arm, a body braced between her and the current, then pine needles beneath her cheek. Rain, a man breathing hard, his hand at the side of her neck. After that, nothing. Silas carried her the last quarter mile. By the time he reached the cabin, his right sleeve was torn and one knee of his trousers was black with mud. He shouldered through the door, laid the unconscious woman near the hearth, and immediately fed split pine into the fire. Her clothes were soaked through. He stood over her for a moment, jaw tight. Ma'am? No answer. He found blankets, his cleanest flannel shirt, and an old pair of wool trousers. Then he turned his back, while doing only what the cold made necessary, wrapping her first in blankets and leaving the dry clothes where she could reach them if she woke. An hour passed before she moved. Amamira opened her eyes to firelight. For several seconds, she knew only warmth. Then she felt unfamiliar cloth against her skin. She sat up sharply. A man rose from the table across the room. Easy! Amamira pulled the blanket higher. He stopped immediately. Tall, broad through the shoulders, wet dark hair pushed back from a weathered face. Gray eyes. She had never seen him before, or thought she hadn't. Where am I? My ranch. Her throat hurt. My horse? His pause told her enough. I saw her reach the timber. Couldn't find her after that. My bag? Creek took it. Amamira shut her eyes. The letters, the papers, everything proving where she had been going and why she had left. Gone. The road? Washed out below the north crossing. She looked toward the window. Nothing existed beyond it but rain and darkness. How long? Creek drops fast once the storm passes. He glanced at the roof as another hard burst rattled against it. If it passes. How long? Silas understood what she was really asking. 3 days, maybe. 3 days. alone in a mountain cabin with a stranger. Amamira looked toward the door. He noticed. Latch works from inside. Her gaze returned to him. Silas pointed toward the stove. Coffee's there. Stew too if your stomach can take it. He picked up a folded blanket from the chair. Amamira watched him. You saved me. Yes. You fed me. He seemed uncertain why she was listing things he already knew. And I'll be here 3 days. Looks that way. She tightened her fingers around the blanket. What do you expect in return? Silas stopped. Rain whispered against the glass. The question seemed to trouble him more than anything else she had said. Finally he answered. Nothing. Amamira searched his face for the part he had left unsaid. There wasn't one. Silas carried his blanket toward the far side of the cabin. Between them, beside the hearth, stood a second chair no one had used in years. Outside, the mountains disappeared behind rain. Inside, Amamira listened to the stranger settle down at a respectful distance and wondered why the first thing that frightened her less than the locked valley was the man who had made no attempt to keep her. She slept badly. Every unfamiliar sound woke her. The pop of pine in the stove, wind whirring the roof shingles. Once, sometime after midnight, she heard Silas rise. Amamira opened her eyes. He crossed only as far as the stove, added a split log, checked the iron kettle, and went back to his blanket without looking toward her bed. By dawn, the rain had softened. She found him outside beneath the lean-to, rubbing down a wet saddle with an old flour sack. His coat hung from a peg. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms, and a narrow cut crossed one knuckle from the previous day's rescue. Silas glanced up. Morning. Morning. Head hurt? Some. Dizzy? Not unless I stand too quickly. Then don't stand too quickly. There was no humor in his face. Amamira almost smiled anyway. Inside, a blackened coffee pot rested on the stove. Beside it sat 2 cups. One was plain tin, dented near the rim. The other was blue enamel. Amamira picked up the blue one. The coffee was strong enough to make her blink. Silas came in carrying kindling. That's terrible coffee. He looked at the pot. Usually worse. This time she did smile. It was the first easy thing either of them had done. By 8, she had found a dishcloth. Silas took it from her. I can wash a plate. I know. Then why are you taking it? You nearly drowned yesterday. I noticed. His mouth shifted slightly. Not quite a smile. Amamira reached for the skillet instead. Silas moved that too. She put both hands on her hips. Mr. She stopped. He had never told her his name. Neither had she told him hers. The realization hung between them strangely. Silas, he said. Just Silas. Amamira hesitated. She had read that name dozens of times, but Creed was not uncommon enough for her tired mind to make the impossible leap, and the photograph that had accompanied one of his letters had been small, faded, and taken years earlier. The man before her was leaner through the face, his beard heavier, his hair longer. Amamira, she said. Something moved in his expression. Amamira. He repeated it slowly, as if testing the sound. For one brief moment she thought he might say something else. Instead, he nodded toward the chair. Sit down, Amamira. She did, mostly because hearing her name in his voice had unsettled her. The day settled into the ordinary work of surviving bad weather. Silas checked the barn roof, cleared mud from a drainage trench, counted cattle through a field glass, then came back soaked from the shoulders down. Amamira remained inside at first. She found things about him without meaning to. 3 shelves of books stood beside the chimney. Shakespeare, a worn Bible, a volume of Longfellow, 2 cattle manuals, a geography book with a cracked leather spine. On the mantel stood a little horse carved from cottonwood. She picked it up. One ear was unfinished. Yours? Silas stood in the doorway. Amamira nearly dropped it. The carving, I mean. Mine. I didn't expect that. What did you expect? She looked at his muddy boots, wet shirt, and the rope over his shoulder. More rope. His quiet laugh surprised both of them. Later she found the tear in his coat. This time she did not ask permission before threading a needle from the small sewing box beside the window. Silas saw her. You don't have to do that. I know. Then why are you? Because the sleeve is nearly coming off. He considered this. Fair enough. She mended it while he sharpened a fence staple tool at the table. Nothing about the hour should have felt intimate. Yet it did. The next time Amamira stood, the room tilted. Her hand missed the chair. Silas crossed the space before she could catch herself. One arm went around her waist. Her palm landed against his chest. Both stopped. She could feel his breath. Silas looked down at her, and for the first time she saw something in those gray eyes that was neither caution nor simple concern. Then his arm loosened. He stepped back immediately. Careful. Amamira nodded. Neither mentioned it. The rain returned before supper. By morning, it had changed from a steady downpour to scattered cold showers, and mist hung between the pins. Silas was halfway to the barn when a crack rolled across the pasture. A pine came down across the north fence. Cattle scattered. Silas ran. Amamira reached the porch as 3 steers pushed toward the broken rails beyond which the land fell toward the swollen ravine. "Stay inside!" Silas shouted. She saw the cattle bunching. Saw Silas could not cover both sides. Amamira grabbed his spare coat and ran. "Amamira!" She ignored him. Mud caught at her boots as she circled wide, arms spread. "Hey, come around!" One steer turned. Another followed. The third pushed toward the opening. Silas swung his hat and drove it sideways. Amamira moved closer from the opposite direction. For several breathless seconds there was only mud, frightened cattle, Silas's voice and the roar of water below. Then the steer turned. The herd moved back toward the pasture. Silas stood breathing hard. Amamira pushed wet hair from her cheek. "I told you to stay inside. You needed another pair of hands. I needed you not falling into another creek. I wasn't planning to." Silas stared at her. Then he laughed. A real laugh this time. Low and brief, but warm enough that Amamira felt it somewhere beneath her ribs. They repaired the fence together. By the time they returned to the cabin, their boots were covered in mud, and both were chilled through. That night their wet socks hung near the stove. Silas poured coffee. Amamira sat with both hands around the blue cup. He watched the fire for a long time. Then he asked, "Who were you running from?" Her fingers stopped. Silas did not look at her. "You don't have to answer. His name is Edwin Mercer." Silas waited. "My father made an arrangement with his family. Money changed hands. Promises were made." "What kind of arrangement?" "Marriage." The word sounded smaller than the thing itself. Amamira stared into her coffee. Edwin started speaking as though the wedding was only a matter of choosing a date. "My father spoke of security. A good house, good connections. What I wanted seemed to be the one detail nobody considered necessary." Silas's jaw tightened. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Did you promise Mercer you'd marry him?" "No." Silas finally looked at her. "Then you don't belong to him." Amamira's throat tightened. Silas's voice remained quiet. "You don't belong to anyone." She looked away before he could see too much. "You make it sound simple." "Should be." The fire shifted between them. Amamira thought of her father's desk, Edwin's papers, the blank place waiting for her name. Then she thought of Silas releasing her the instant she could stand on her own. She rose and carried her cup toward the shelf. That was when she noticed the open book beside his chair. A line had been marked lightly in pencil. Amamira stopped. She knew those words, not from the book, from a letter, one she had read so often that the fold had begun to split. A man she had never met had once copied that same sentence beneath a page of plain, careful handwriting, and added, "A person ought to be free enough to stay for the right reason." Her pulse slowed, then quickened. Behind her, Silas placed another log on the fire. Amamira touched the penciled line with one fingertip. Outside, rain began again, soft against the roof. Somewhere downstream, 9 letters lay scattered beneath mud and broken branches. But one sentence had found her anyway. And suddenly, the stranger across the room did not feel entirely like a stranger. Amamira closed the book. She almost asked him then. Instead, she watched Silas bank the fire for the night. There was something familiar in the way he chose not to fill silence merely because silence existed. His letters had been like that too. Plain sentences, no boasting, no promises about a grand house or easy living. When she had asked what kind of future he could offer, he had written only that Creed Ranch was hard country, the winters were long, and he would never ask a wife to become smaller so he could feel larger. She had kept that letter, or she had until the creek took it. "You read much?" she asked. Silas glanced toward the book in her hands. "Enough. You mark passages. Sometimes. Do you put them in letters?" His eyes stayed on hers a second longer than usual. "Sometimes." Amamira's heartbeat changed. Before either could say more, something struck the cabin roof with a wet slap. Silas looked upward. "Branch." He took the lantern and went outside. The question remained behind. At first light, Amamira woke to an empty cabin. Silas's coat was gone from its peg. The rain had finally stopped. A pale strip of sunlight lay across the floorboards, and water dripped steadily from the eaves. Beyond the window, the mountains appeared again, dark pine ridges rising behind torn gray clouds. She dressed in clothes Silas had found for her from an old trunk. The trousers were too large, and the shirt sleeves had to be rolled twice, but they were dry. The blue coffee cup waited beside the stove. So did a plate covered with a clean cloth. Biscuits. Amamira touched one. Still warm. She was halfway through the second when she heard a horse. Silas rode into the yard with mud up the animal's legs and something dark tied behind his saddle. He dismounted stiffly. Amamira stepped onto the porch. "You found my horse?" Silas shook his head. Her hope fell. "Found something else." He untied a leather pouch. Amamira knew it immediately. "My bag. Part of it." She came down the steps. The leather was scraped nearly white along one edge. One buckle was missing. Silas set it on the porch rail and opened it carefully. A hairbrush with half its teeth broken. 3 coins, a water-swollen handkerchief, 2 ruined sheets of paper. Then one envelope. Silas stopped. Amamira saw his hand become completely still. Mud streaked the corner, but the writing remained readable. "Miss Amamira Dunn." Silas stared at the name, then at her, then back at the envelope. The color seemed to leave his face. "Your name?" Amamira could barely hear him. "Yes." His thumb moved over the handwriting. His handwriting. She recognized it now. So did he. Silas looked at the woman he had pulled from the creek, the woman who had mended his coat, driven cattle beside him, slept beneath his roof, and told him about Edwin Mercer. His voice came out almost as a whisper. "That can't be my bride." Amamira stared. "Your bride?" He looked almost embarrassed by the word. "Silas Creed." The name landed between them. Amamira's lips parted. For a second she saw not the wet porch, not the battered saddlebag, but 9 letters spread across her bedroom table months earlier. Silas Creed. Creed Ranch. Cedar Hollow. She looked at his face again, and finally saw pieces of the faded photograph beneath the beard and 11 years of mountain weather. A laugh escaped her. Small at first, then another. Silas looked bewildered. Amamira pressed a hand to her mouth, but her eyes had already filled. I thought you'd be taller. Silas blinked. I am 6 feet 2. That only made her laugh harder. He finally smiled. She took the damaged letter from his hand. I came all this way for you. The smile left him, not from disappointment. Something heavier. I went to meet you. I know. You weren't on the stage. The road washed out. I thought you changed your mind. I nearly changed Rivers. His laugh came quietly. Then they were simply standing there. Close. Too close for two people who no longer had the protection of being strangers. Silas's eyes lowered to her mouth. Amamira saw it. She stepped nearer. He did not move. Another inch and she could feel warmth from him despite the cold morning. Silas. His hand lifted. For one hopeful second she thought he would touch her cheek. Instead, it stopped. He lowered it. No. The words stung. Amamira stepped back. Silas saw it immediately. Not because I don't want to. She looked at him. His jaw tightened. You came here to decide whether the man in those letters was worth marrying. Yes. You can't decide that while a washed-out bridge keeps you under his roof. You think I don't know my own mind? I think you deserve a road out before I ask you to stay. The anger she had reached for disappeared before she could hold it. Silas glanced toward the valley. When that crossing opens, I'll take you to Cedar Hollow. And then? Then you choose. By noon, the creek had fallen nearly 2 feet. By the following morning, Silas tested the north crossing on horseback and returned with his boots wet but his horse steady. The road's open. Amamira had expected relief. Instead, she looked around the cabin. The blue cup, the half-carved horse, the coat she had mended. Silas had already packed bread and dried meat into a saddle pouch. He meant what he had said. 2 hours later, they rode into Cedar Hollow beneath a washed clean sky. Silas stopped at the small hotel across from the mercantile. Inside, he placed coins on the counter for one night's room and signed the register. The clerk pushed over a receipt. Silas handed it to Amamira. Westbound stage leaves at 4 tomorrow. She looked at him. You checked? This morning. Of course he had. Outside, his horse waited. Amamira wanted him to ask. One word would have been enough. Come back. He didn't. If I go? She asked. Silas rested one hand on the saddle horn. Then you go. Her chest tightened. And you? Got cattle waiting. He put on his hat. Goodbye, Amamira. Then he rode away. She watched until horse and rider disappeared beyond the last buildings. The hotel room was small. Iron bed, washstand, one narrow window. Amamira sat without removing her coat. For the first time since leaving home, no one stood between her and any road she wanted. It felt strangely lonely. Near sunset, she opened the surviving letter. Most of the ink had blurred, but one paragraph remained. I have lived alone long enough to know loneliness can make a man selfish. I don't want a woman who stays because she has nowhere else to go. If you come, I hope you will always know you can leave. Then, if you stay, I will know why. Amamira read it twice. Downstairs, the clerk called that the evening wagon was leaving for the South Road. She folded the letter. At Creed Ranch, Silas unsaddled his horse in silence. The cabin looked exactly as it had before the flood. That was the trouble. He carried wood inside, stopped. Smoke was already rising from the chimney. Silas's hand moved toward the revolver at his belt. Then the cabin door opened. Amamira stepped onto the porch. For several seconds, he did not move. The stage leaves tomorrow. You're supposed to be at the hotel. I was. How did you get here? Paid a freight wagon as far as Miller's turnoff. Walked the rest. Silas stared at her muddy boots. You walked 3 miles. Closer to 4. Amamira. She came down one step. I came all this way for you once, Silas Creed. His expression changed. This time I came back. He crossed the yard slowly. He stopped in front of her. Still, he did not touch her. Amamira smiled faintly. The road is open. I know. I had money. I know. A room. I paid for it. A stage tomorrow. Yes. And I came back anyway. Silas swallowed. Are you sure? Amamira answered by closing the distance herself. Their first kiss was quiet. No storm, no desperation. Only his hand finally resting against her cheek after she leaned into it, and her fingers curling gently into the front of his coat. When they separated, Silas rested his forehead against hers. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The next morning, hoofbeats sounded on the ridge. Silas was pouring coffee. He set the pot down. Amamira looked toward the window. 2 riders were climbing the road to Creed Ranch. Silas's face hardened. 2 men. He moved closer to the glass. One has a badge. The second rider dismounted. Amamira saw his coat first, then his face. The blue cup slipped slightly in her hand. Edwin. Silas turned from the window. He did not ask who she meant. The answer was written across her face. Outside, the 2 riders passed through the ranch gate. One wore a dark coat with a territorial badge pinned beneath the lapel. Edwin Mercer rode beside him on a chestnut gelding too clean for the muddy mountain road. Silas reached automatically toward Amamira. His hand stopped halfway. He lowered it. You want me beside you? Amamira set the cup down. Yes. That was all he needed. Silas opened the door. Cold morning air swept through the cabin. The deputy dismounted first. He was perhaps 50, gray at the temples, with rain stains on his boots, and a tired face that suggested he had spent more years settling other people's troubles than enjoying his own peace. Silas Creed? Yes. Deputy Warren Hale, Cedar Hollow District. Silas nodded. Edwin dismounted. His eyes went immediately past Silas. Amamira. She stepped onto the porch. Edwin's shoulders relaxed as though he had recovered a misplaced possession. There you are. Amamira felt Silas move beside her. Not ahead, beside. Edwin climbed one step. I've been looking everywhere for you. I didn't ask you to. His mouth tightened. Deputy Hale removed a folded document from his coat. Mr. Creed, a complaint was filed concerning Miss Dine's disappearance. Mr. Mercer says she was expected elsewhere and may have been taken against her will. Silas looked at Amamira. He could have answered. He didn't. Amamira came down the steps. He pulled me out of Blackwater Creek. Hale glanced toward her. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. My horse slipped when the water crossed the trail. The current took me. Mr. Creed found me downstream and carried me here. How long were you here? Until the north crossing opened. Edwin stepped forward. She had nowhere else to go. You can't call that voluntary. Amamira turned toward him. Oh. I wasn't finished. Edwin stopped. She faced Hale again. Yesterday, Mr. Creed took me to Cedar Hollow. He paid for a hotel room and told me when the westbound stage was leaving. Hale's eyebrows lifted. You stayed there? For part of the day. And then? I returned here. Mr. Creed brought you. No. Silas's eyes remained on her. Amamira continued. I paid for a place on a freight wagon as far as Miller's Turnoff. I walked from there. Hale looked at Silas, then Edwin. The deputy folded the complaint once. That changes the kidnapping portion considerably. Edwin's composure cracked. It changes nothing about the agreement. Amamira felt the old coldness return. What agreement? You know perfectly well. Edwin pulled another packet from his coat. Your father signed these months ago. My father signed them. Yes. I didn't. You were informed. That wasn't my question. Edwin's jaw tightened. Hale took the packet. He read the first page, then the second. This isn't something I'm deciding on a ranch porch. Then arrest Creed, and we'll decide it in town. No. Edwin stared at him. Hale tucked the papers beneath his arm. I've got a woman standing here telling me she was rescued, delivered safely to town, and then returned of her own choosing. I'm not putting irons on a man, because you dislike where she went afterward. For the first time that morning, Amamira breathed fully, but Hale wasn't finished. The rest can be heard before the magistrate. Edwin looked almost pleased again. Good. Hale turned to Amamira. Your father is in Cedar Hollow. That hurt more than she expected. Silas saw it. Her fingers had closed around the porch rail. He said quietly, You don't have to go anywhere with Mercer. Hale nodded. You can ride separately. Amamira looked toward the open ranch gate. 3 days earlier she had feared being trapped here. Now the thought of leaving made her chest ache. I'll go. Silas saddled the horses. They rode into Cedar Hollow beneath a pale sky. Edwin stayed close to Deputy Hale. Silas and Amamira rode several lengths behind. At one bend, Silas spoke. If you want to turn around, say so. And then what? I take you back. You'd make trouble with the law for me? No. She looked at him. I'd take you back because the deputy said you could choose whether to go. Amamira almost laughed. Even now, choice, always choice. The magistrate worked from 2 rooms above a feed and hardware store. The stairs smelled of dust, lamp oil, and burlap grain sacks. Amamira heard her father's voice before she entered. Then she saw him. He stood beside the window in the same dark brown coat he wore for business meetings. For one terrible instant, he looked simply like the father she remembered from quieter years. Then he spoke. Amamira. No embrace. No question about the flood. His eyes went to Silas. So this is him. Silas removed his hat. Amamira's father looked back at her. Do you understand what you've done? I understand what you tried to do. I tried to secure your future. With Edwin's money. A silence followed. The magistrate, an older man with wire spectacles, cleared his throat. Let's sit down. Documents covered the desk. Letters between Amamira's father and Edwin's family. Figures, dates, promises concerning property and debts. A proposed marriage agreement. Amamira read every page. She felt Silas behind her, but not close enough to touch. Her father pointed toward the papers. The Mercer family agreed to settle obligations that would otherwise have ruined us. Us? You are my daughter. And that made me payment? No one said payment. You didn't need to. Edwin leaned forward. This is becoming theatrical. She knew marriage was expected. Expected isn't agreed. You came west in distress. Then this man found you alone and vulnerable. Edwin turned toward the magistrate. Creed had her isolated for days. Now she repeats whatever suits him. Silas's chair scraped softly. Amamira's father looked almost relieved, as though finally the cowboy would lose his temper and prove everything they wanted to believe. Silas stood. The magistrate looked at him. Mr. Creed, you have something to say? Silas's eyes went to Amamira, then back to the magistrate. Ask her. Nothing more. He sat down. Amamira looked at him. Silas did not nod encouragement. Did not tell her what to say. He simply waited. Something inside her settled. She pulled the proposed agreement closer. Page 1, page 2, terms negotiated between families. Page 3, the place intended for her name, blank. Amamira turned the document around. She placed one finger beneath the empty line. I did not sign this. Nobody spoke. And I do not consent. Deputy Hale shifted beside the door. The magistrate removed his spectacles, cleaned them slowly, then put them back on. Mr. Mercer, do you possess another instrument bearing Miss Dine's signature? Edwin's face hardened. No, but her father. I asked about hers. No. The magistrate looked toward Amamira's father. Any written consent from your daughter? Her father stared at the desk. No. The room became so quiet that wagon wheels could be heard on the street below. The magistrate gathered the papers. Then I have men negotiating a proposed marriage and financial arrangements surrounding it. What I do not have is Miss Dine agreeing to become Mr. Mercer's wife. Edwin stood. She ran away. Yes, Amamira said. Every face turned toward her. I did. She looked at her father. Because none of you would hear me while I was standing still. Her father's expression changed. Not enough for forgiveness. Enough for the words to reach him. Deputy Hale took the kidnapping complaint from his pocket. With her statement, the hotel register, and her voluntary return to Creed Ranch, I have no grounds to hold Mr. Creed. He folded the paper. Edwin looked at Amamira. If you walk out of here, don't imagine you can simply return home when this fails. Amamira said nothing. So, you'll have no family willing to protect you, no agreement, no security, and nothing legally ties Creed to you. Silas remained silent. That mattered. Amamira looked down at the unsigned paper one final time. Then she laid it flat on the magistrate's desk. Then whatever I have next will finally be mine. She turned, crossed the room, opened the door, and walked downstairs alone. Outside, Cedar Hollow moved through an ordinary afternoon. A freight wagon rattled past. Someone hammered a loose board across the street. 2 horses drank from the public trough. Amamira stood beside the hitching rail with cold wind moving through her coat. Behind her was the room where men had finally been forced to hear her. Ahead was an open road. The door upstairs remained closed. Silas did not immediately follow. And for once, Amamira understood why. He was giving her the street, the horses, the hotel across from the mercantile, the westbound road disappearing between the buildings. Even now, after Edwin's papers had failed, and her father's authority had finally reached its limit, Silas would not turn her freedom into an opportunity for himself. Amamira rested one gloved hand on the hitching rail. A wagon passed, iron rims clicking over stones. Somewhere behind the feed store, a man called for another sack of oats. Cedar Hollow went about its afternoon, as if nothing remarkable had happened upstairs. Perhaps that was fitting. Freedom had not arrived with trumpets. It looked like an ordinary street, and several directions she could take. The door behind her opened. Silas came down the stairs. He stopped beneath the awning. Amamira did not turn immediately. She heard his boots cross the boardwalk. Then silence. He stood several feet away. "What now?" he asked. 2 words. No demand hidden inside them. Amamira finally faced him. "I thought you'd ask whether I'm coming back to the ranch." Silas looked toward the mountains. "Are you? You see? That's exactly what I mean." His brow furrowed. She almost smiled. "I crossed a good part of the country because of your letters. I wanted to know whether the man who wrote them was real. And? I found a man who pulled me out of a creek." Silas lowered his eyes. "Fed me when I couldn't stand straight. Let me sleep under his roof without making me afraid of the door. Took me to town the first morning the crossing was safe." She stepped closer. "And then today, when every man in that room was talking about me, you had the chance to speak for me." Silas met her eyes. "You didn't need me to." "No." A pause. "That's how I knew." Silas's expression softened. Amamira looked toward the open road. "Edwin was right about one thing." Silas became still. "Nothing legally ties me to you. My father isn't choosing. No. I don't need your cabin tonight. I have enough money for a room." Silas nodded. "And if I wanted, I could buy a stage ticket tomorrow. You could. Amamira looked back at him. So ask me properly. Silas blinked. For once, the quiet cowboy had no answer ready. Ask you what? She raised an eyebrow. He understood. Slowly, Silas removed his hat. Wind moved through his dark hair. Amamira done. She waited. Silas glanced once at the road, as if reminding himself it was there. Then he looked only at her. Would you choose a life beside me? Her eyes filled before she could prevent it. Silas did not reach for her. Amamira smiled. Yes. Only then did his shoulders ease. She stepped forward and slipped her hand into his. They stood that way beside the hitching rail, while Cedar Hollow continued around them. Nothing had changed. Everything had. Amamira did not ride back to Creed Ranch that afternoon. That surprised Silas. It also pleased him. She rented the same small hotel room where he had left her before, this time paying for it herself. The clerk wrote out a receipt for 3 nights and pushed it across the counter. Amamira folded it carefully. A small thing. Her room, her money, her decision. Over the following weeks, she began putting her life back together. The flood had taken nearly everything she carried west, but not everything she owned. With the magistrate's finding clear and Edwin's arrangement no longer hanging over her, Amamira wrote for the small sum of money that remained hers and arranged for a trunk of personal belongings to be sent west. Silas came to Cedar Hollow twice a week, never every day. He brought news from the ranch. A missing heifer had turned up near the lower pasture. The north fence still leaned. The roof had started leaking over the pantry. Amamira listened as if these were important matters. They were becoming important to her. Once Silas arrived carrying the blue enamel cup wrapped in newspaper. She stared at it. You brought me a coffee cup? You kept using it. That doesn't mean I stole it. Didn't say you did. She turned it over in her hands. You rode 9 miles to bring me this? Had to buy nails. Amamira looked at the tiny paper sack in his other hand. Those are the most inconvenient nails in Wyoming. Silas smiled. Their wedding took place several weeks later, after the first real snow whitened the upper ridge. There was no grand church, no long guest list, no bargain between families. The magistrate came out from Cedar Hollow with Deputy Hale as witness. An older ranch couple from the neighboring valley brought a pie and enough coffee for everyone. Amamira arrived at Creed Ranch in a hired wagon with her own trunk behind her. Silas stood near the porch. He wore a clean dark coat and looked more nervous than he had facing Edwin Mercer. Amamira stepped down. Behind the wagon stood a saddled mare Silas had brought for her. He had not hidden the meaning. If she changed her mind, she could ride away. The ranch gate stood open. Amamira looked at it, then at Silas. You expecting someone else? His eyes followed hers toward the gate. No. Then you forgot to close it. I thought I'd leave it that way. Amamira understood. She walked to him. Silas offered his hand. She took it. When the magistrate asked whether she entered the marriage of her own free will, Amamira answered before the final word had fully left his mouth. I do. Silas's thumb moved once across her knuckles. That was the only sign of what the answer did to him. Winter settled hard over Creed Ranch. Marriage did not turn the mountains gentle. Water froze in the trough. A calf came early during a January night. Snow pushed against the barn doors. Silas still made terrible coffee. Amamira still told him so. By spring, a narrow garden appeared beside the cabin. Silas found her one morning measuring rows with a length of twine. What's all that? Beans, onions, carrots. Ground's poor there. Amamira looked at him. Silas reconsidered. Could be excellent. It will be. He wisely went back to the barn. She learned the cattle trails. He learned that she liked to read near an open window. She learned how he could tell weather from the horses before clouds reached the ridge. He learned not to move her books merely because he wanted the table clear. His carvings began sharing the mantel with things she had brought from her old life. By the following autumn, 2 chairs sat beside the hearth. Both showed wear. One evening, clouds gathered above Blackwater Creek. Amamira stood on the porch. The same mountains that had once swallowed the road now rose gold and dark beneath the setting sun. Silas came through the ranch gate after checking the cattle. He followed her gaze. "Rain coming." "I know." He rested his hand on the porch rail beside hers. Close. Not touching. After all that time, the habit remained. He still left the last inch to her. Amamira looked at his hand, then turned her palm upward and reached for him. Silas's fingers closed around hers. Neither said anything more. Beyond the pasture, the road ran clear toward Cedar Hollow. The ranch gate remained open. Amamira could see it from where she stood. Once she had nearly lost her life searching for a road away from men who believed they could decide where she belonged. Now there was no washed-out bridge, no contract, no debt, no locked door. Nothing stopped her from leaving. Silas stood beside her without tightening his hold. Amamira leaned gently against his shoulder. The first drops of rain struck the porch roof. The gate remained open. Neither of them walked toward it. Maybe that was what made their story worth remembering. Amamira stayed beside Silas not because a storm trapped her there, not because a piece of paper told her where she belonged, and not because she owed him for saving her life. She stayed when the road was clear enough to carry her anywhere, and Silas never closed that gate for her. Sometimes love isn't proven by how tightly someone holds on. Sometimes it's proven by the space they leave for you to choose them. Imagine standing where Amamira once stood, with one road leading back toward the life others had planned for you, and another disappearing into country you had never known. Would you have found the courage to choose your own way? And if someone loved you enough to leave the door open, would you have recognized how rare that kind of love was? Maybe some of us have spent years believing that being needed is the same as being loved. Amamira and Silas found something quieter. 2 people carrying different wounds learned that a second chance doesn't erase the past. It simply gives you somewhere honest to begin again. If this story brought someone to your mind, tell me in the comments what you believe made Amamira turn back toward Creed Ranch. And if you'd like to spend more evenings with stories of lonely roads, unexpected love, old mysteries, and hearts finding their way home, you're warmly invited to subscribe. There are more stories waiting beyond the next ridge.